According to General Hospital teasers, Jason Morgan's trip to Croatia might end in Britt Westbourne's bed. When Jason's search is successful, will there be a passionate reunion? Jason is currently unable to shake the sighting of the Britt airport. Jason isn't entirely convinced that Britt is dead, despite Carly Spencer's insistence on that point. Before he had a clear view of Britt, Jason could feel her presence. Jason felt as though a magnetic pull was telling him to look up and see his ex. Jason is now thinking that since Britt's flight went to Dubrovnik, she might still be alive and there. Since Britt allegedly died in Liesl Obrecht's arms, Jason has made the decision to speak with her, but she might not have the answers he needs. She might not be of much assistance, regardless of whether Obrecht is concealing Britt's survival or was tricked like everyone else. However, because of that travel to Dubrovnik, Jason already has some information he can use. Jason might be able to pinpoint Britt's exact hiding place with the help of Damien Spinelli, who always has a few tricks up his sleeve. In any case, GH spoilers indicate that after all this time apart, Britt and Jason will eventually cross paths. Jason might travel to Croatia and then confront Britt, who will have to give an explanation. There might be sparks between Britt and Jason from the beginning, regardless of the story she gives. It's important to remember that when Britt died, Jason was still thought to be dead, so she should also be surprised to see him. It might not take long for passion to flare between Jason and Britt after fate brings them back together. To start their next romantic chapter, it would be fantastic if temptation could entice Britt and Jason into bed right away. According to General Hospital spoilers, Jason will stop at nothing to uncover the whole Britt truth, so keep checking back for any exciting developments. On Monday, July 28, 2025, General Hospital spoilers will be released. Molly Lansing Davis is known to pick fights, so fans can anticipate this. Liesl Obrecht is found by Jason Morgan. Additionally, the fatal wedding of Willow Tate and Drew Kane commences. Let's discuss what will happen in the upcoming ABC soap opera episode as you continue reading. The doomed wedding of Willow Tate. Let's begin with Willow and Drew. Fans are aware that Curtis Ashford told the bride that her mother had an affair with Drew in an attempt to save her. Willow was appalled, and her daughter addressed Nina Reeves as soon as she entered the room. Nina is forced to acknowledge that it was accurate. Nina hopes that the loss of her kid will mean that there won't be a wedding. Read more. See what transpired on the most recent episode of GH, but before Nina knows it, Willow is heading straight for Drew as she walks down the aisle. She is glaring, therefore I'm willing to wager that she will criticize Drew in front of everyone. I'm sorry for the children, especially Scout Kane, who is so lovely. Liesl Obrecht and Jason Morgan connect in the interim. Jason will make an effort to locate Liesl. The right-hand guy of Sonny Corinthos does, and the two converse. Naturally, the woman who resembled Britt Westbourne will be Jason's top worry. Will Liesl be as caught off guard as everyone else, or does she have any clue as to Britt's survival? According to Monday, July 28 General Hospital teasers, Christina Corinthos Davis requested Michael Corinthos to divert Cody Bell's attention from Molly Lansing Davis. Christina then asked her sister a lot of questions regarding her feelings for Cody. Sparks are still flying even though Molly denied having feelings for Cody. However, there may be some issues with Cody and Christina's plan to target Ava Jerome. The possibility that Molly Lansing Davis will start a fight is also hinted at. Is it going to be with Cody, Christina, or possibly Ava? In the meantime, Jocelyn Jacks and Jack Brennan established the law. What will happen to the inquiry of Professor Henry Hank Dalton now that Joss has been exposed by Dante Falconeri and Anna Devane? Although Anna and Dante are exercising caution, everything may go wrong if Joss gets into any type of difficulty. On Monday, July 28, 2025, which storyline are you most excited to see? Post your ideas in the space provided for comments below. Make sure you keep up with all that's going on with GH at the moment. For news, updates, and spoilers about General Hospital, return here frequently. When Jason got off the plane in Croatia, he had no romantic expectations. His thoughts had been consumed by threats, darkness, and unresolved issues from the past that never really went away. However, he discovered something completely unexpected as he made his way through the peaceful cobblestone lanes of the isolated village, far from Port Charles and its never-ending whirl of chaos. Britt Westbourne. Their paths had not before met in a way that was characterized by trauma or terrible endings for a very long time. Prior to his arrival, Jason was unaware that she was in Croatia. He had come here to follow up on a lead regarding a shipment that had gone missing, perhaps connected to one of Sonny's adversaries, or an old threat resurfacing in Eastern Europe. However, Britt was the one staring back at him when he entered that tiny medical facility for what ought to have been a straightforward bandage for a knife wound. Although her dark eyes widened in recognition, she initially remained silent. Jason was also taken aback. In an instant it felt as though all of the tension that had previously been between them, the convoluted past, the nights they had stolen, the close calls, had returned. At first they didn't talk for very long. Her gasping gave her away, but her hands remained calm as she patched him up. She felt anxious, uncomfortable in that old familiar sense, but not scared. Despite his stoicism, Jason also felt it. His responses were brief, and she refrained from interrogating him until the bandage was in place and she took a step back, leaning against the counter with her arms folded. "Why are you in this place?" Finally, in a quiet, guarded voice, she asked. He said, "Following something." She brushed a lock of hair behind her ear and said, "Neither did I know you'd be here." He wanted to know why she had abruptly departed Port Charles the previous year, but he said, "Life is funny like that." She had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind stories of unresolved heartache and hazy rumors of a new job abroad. However, it was evident that something more profound had brought her here when we saw her again. Whatever Britt's motivations were, they were evident on her face. She didn't run aimlessly. Jason continued to find reasons to visit the clinic throughout the course of the following few days. Antibiotics come first. Next, an update. And then for something that wasn't really required. Every visit lasted longer than the last. They skirted the actual problem, their shared past, until it all exploded one evening. Due to a storm, the clinic closed early, leaving them alone. Rain battered the windows as thunder roared across the Adriatic Sea. The electricity flickered as Britt poured a glass of wine for each of them. Despite the fact that it was almost cinematic, neither of them felt like laughing about it. As she looked into her glass, she remarked, "I should have properly said goodbye to you." Jason's countenance was unclear as he looked up from the map he was perusing. She went on, "I didn't want to hurt you again." After a long silence, he answered, "You didn't. The crack was, I hurt myself by thinking I could walk away from you like it didn't matter. The beginning. Everything else spilled out once the wall was breached." Their voices were raw with honesty and regret as they spoke till the storm passed. Britt acknowledged how afraid she had been following their previous try at something genuine, and how nearly she had allowed him in completely before everything went wrong. Jason acknowledged his own fear, that Britt would be another name on that list, that he would always be the man who lost the people he loved. They were in each other's arms without having planned it or really comprehending how they got there. It wasn't hasty or careless. It was both strange and familiar. It was tempered by something softer, something earned, yet the heat that had always been between them came back full force. Like he was rediscovering her, Jason gave her a slow kiss. She answered quickly, as if she had been suppressing her feelings for too long. Between long pauses and silent comprehension, clothes were removed. The distinction between the past and present had entirely vanished by the time they arrived at her bed. They had never spent a night like that before. It was simultaneously emotional, desperate, and anchoring in addition to being physical. When the sun rose, Jason remained. He remained curled up on the covers next to her, observing her as she slept, her hair dripping over the pillow. And there was no regret or anxiety as she opened her eyes and stirred. A simple smile that conveyed that we're still here. They were in a bubble together for the next few days. Jason kept pursuing his lead, but Britt was now also involved in the mission. She assisted him with wound care, document decoding, and navigating the area. They startled each other by returning to each other at night with a hunger. It was more than just passion. It was the culmination of all the lost opportunities and suppressed feelings. Their bond was unadulterated, unfiltered, and terrifying. Bubbles, of course, are temporary. Port Charles was still in the distance. Jason was unable to break his promises. Britt had also come to terms with her loneliness, and realized that running was how she shielded herself from disappointment. However, something had changed. They had changed from two broken souls trying to evade the inevitable. They had faced it directly in a strange place, on a bed that turned become their sole refuge. It was the beginning of the end when Jason got a call from Carly telling him that Sunny's condition was getting worse once more. He needed to return. He told Britt without hesitancy in his voice. She wasn't being asked to follow him. He wasn't pleading with her to remain. He was simply being truthful. He remarked, "I'm not sure what will happen when I return." Britt looked at him, then actually looked at him and nodded, saying, "But I know what this means to me. It has significance for me as well." They made no promises to one another, perhaps for the first time in a long time. They weren't like that. However, they spent one last night together before Jason left, which was more like a beginning than a farewell. Something remained unfinished between them, but now it was lighted by hope rather than fear. Jason returned to Port Charles with a calmer heart and a clearer head. Not everything in Croatia had been resolved by him. The adversaries remained in the field. The threat had not diminished. However, a fundamental change had occurred within him. He was now battling for a future he had never imagined imaginable, not merely for survival. Britt's heart was no longer in danger, but she remained in Croatia for the time being. She wasn't hiding for once. She was getting better. And they had discovered something uncommon, something valuable, somewhere between the Adriatic waves and the remains of their former selves. Only time would tell if that meant a permanent reunion or a new chapter in their story. However, the reunion in Croatia was more than simply a romantic diversion for Jason and Britt. It served as evidence that love, whatever its complexity, may always find a way to return, even on different continents. Despite everything, Carly Corinthos believed she had experienced and survived every emotional storm Port Charles could throw at her. However, nothing could have prepared her for what happened in such quick succession that she was left gasping for air, as though the entire earth beneath her had changed in an instant. Carly was stunned by the convergence of turmoil and sadness occurring all around her as she stood in the center of the Metro Court ballroom, still wearing the delicate gold gown she had selected in the hopes of a happy day. As visitors shuffled uneasily, uncertain of what was going on, the soft music that had previously reverberated from the string quartet now felt eerie in the background. And Willow was all she could think of. Radiant in her wedding dress, Willow stood motionless beneath the flowery arch, her gaze focused on a piece of paper that shook in her hands and her face pallid. After exchanging rings and saying the vows, there was a loud clearing of the throat, followed by silence, precisely as the officiant had asked if anyone had protested. Instinctively, Carly had turned her head around. She had anticipated a scene from Nina or possibly Sunny. The ensuing stillness, however, had been much riskier. Everything changed after Willow muttered something barely audible under her breath. The guests at the wedding were unaware of what was happening. Michael tried to read Willow's face as he stood next to her. His lips slightly parted and his forehead profoundly furrowed. His heart thumped with mounting dread, bewilderment, and anticipation. Willow's attitude has suddenly changed. 10 minutes before, she had not been the same radiant, contented bride. He could see it in her eyes, which no longer met his with warmth but rather with a sort of aloof sadness, and in her body, which was taut, almost quivering. Before it was uttered, Carly sensed it. Years of dealing with deceit, treachery, and power struggles have sharpened this instinct. There was a terrible problem. As she proceeded, instinct urging her to shield her kid and mend whatever had just been damaged, her heart raced. However, it was too late. Willow turned to Michael and murmured, "I can't do this." The room seemed to have been sucked of its oxygen as she spoke in a delicate, trembling voice that carried. Instantly the murmuring started, growing into desperate whispers. There was a gasp. Nina gripped Valentine's arm in shock. Dante, who was standing in the crowd close to Sam, looked at his brother in astonishment that reflected that of everyone else. For a long time Michael remained silent. He simply stood there, holding Willow's hand tenderly. "What?" At last, with a phrase that seemed more like a breath than a question, he inquired. Willow started to cry in silence. She gave a headshake. "I believed I could," she muttered. "I desired to. However, I realized something when I heard the officiant ask for objections. I'm not telling you the truth." Carly's heart fell to her stomach. Or with myself. She saw the face of her kid fall apart. After everything they had been through, this was not going to happen. Not after the harsh reconciliations, the custody disputes, And the cancer scare. At last they were supposed to be alright. They obviously weren't, though. Then like a razor, Molly's voice sliced through the room. This is unbelievable. She stormed down the aisle after snapping. After several tense moments with TJ over parenting disputes and unresolved resentment regarding her involvement in the surrogate decision, the younger Davis sister had already been tense all week. But now that her feelings were strong and her own fears were surfacing, she was unable to control herself. You decide to drop this bomb on this day? Are you even interested in Michael's implications of this? For Wiley? For all those who gathered here to honor you? Her tone was harsh and unvarnished. Instinctively, Christina moved forward to try to stop it. With a gentle touch on her sister's arm, Christina whispered, "Molly, now isn't the time." Molly yelled, "No," and withdrew. I'm fed up with people acting as though their emotional scars give them the right to continue exploding over the rest of us. Grow up. The audience fell silent once more. Willow's face was flushed with embarrassment and guilt as she covered her mouth. As if seeking the missing piece to explain what had happened, Michael glanced at Willow, then at Molly, and finally at the ground. For Michael, everything was now broken, and the moment seemed to drag on forever. Then he turned and left. Nothing. Simply turned away from the altar. Carly wanted to pursue him, but she felt compelled to remain planted by Willow, who now appeared to be about to pass out. Furthermore, the mother in her, yes, the mother who had developed a strong affection for Willow, could not leave her. As visitors started to whisper and disperse, Molly became enraged and paced close to the edge of the gathering. She snatched away TJ's hand as it reached for hers as he appeared at her side. "Avoid it," she whispered. "I'm not looking for pity." Carly finally moved closer to Willow at the altar, her voice firm but low, saying, "I want people to stop being so selfish." "What took place?" she asked, glancing over Willow's heartbroken face. Willow started to say something but stopped herself. "I discovered something," she whispered. "A letter." "Nina." Carly's mouth tightened. "What sort of correspondence?" "It had nothing to do with the SEC," Willow remarked hastily. "It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me, as well as my biological mom." She paused, gasping for air as she spoke. "My real mother." "It makes a huge difference." Carly blinked in shock. It was upsetting to think that Nina might have been complicit in yet another fabrication regarding Willow's origins, but far more painful was the thought that Willow had been left to face that reality by herself in the days before her wedding. Willow's voice cracked as she said, "She lied to me. And I came to the realization that, with so much of my existence based on partial truths, I don't know how to proceed." Carly put a soft hand on Willow's arm despite the anger that was bubbling inside of her at Nina. "I need to figure out who I am before I can be a wife to anyone." "Then you must act in your own best interests," she advised. "Michael will sustain injuries. He is strong, though. And so are you." In the meantime, Michael stood by himself outside, observing the approaching clouds darken the sky over Port Charles. The trees rustled in the slight increase in wind, and sirens could be heard in the distance from downtown. There was a part of him that constantly anticipated catastrophe, so he had been preparing for something to go wrong. However, he had no idea how to interpret it. He had had a deep and unselfish love for Willow. He had stood up for her. She had now left, not because she felt betrayed, but rather because she needed to take back her identity. It hurt, but he understood somehow. Molly was still furious inside the ballroom. She yelled at TJ about how no one was taking responsibility anymore, and how love had devolved into a disposable item that was discarded the moment things were difficult. TJ, who was always the more composed of the two, reminded her that sometimes the hardest decision is the correct one, and that Willow had probably just saved herself and Michael more harm in the long sense. Molly, however, wasn't prepared to accept that. She was projecting her own agony, which came from silent loss and the complexities of their own circumstances. As she observed the mayhem, Christina suddenly became clear-headed. She understood that families, particularly in Port Charles, would always be chaotic while everyone else frantically tried to make sense of Willow's choice or Molly's breakdown. However, there was always a chance to overcome it. She approached Carly in silence, gave her a single nod and said, "I'll make sure Willow gets home safely." Carly nodded appreciatively. Although the night had veered off course, it was still not over. It was merely another turn of events. The end was never truly the end at Port Charles. Rather, it was only the start of something far more intricate. The once celebratory ballroom was left resonating with quiet, the faint aroma of flowers, and the faint trace of what may have been as it was cleared out. But the truth had been told beneath it all. And there was something unquestionably compelling in that despite all the confusion and grief, Willow was back in charge. The pain would be overcome by Michael. As usual, Carly would defend those she cared about. And maybe not today, but eventually, Molly would discover that anger wasn't the solution to disappointment. The rain finally started to fall outside. It drizzled steadily, not in torrents, as though the town itself had been holding its breath.